Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to our small group youth experience. I'm just going to do some intro stuff. This will happen every single time because we're no longer gathering every single week. We have to do some announcements and some explanation of some stuff. So first off, I want to say thank you for joining us. If you're new here, our whole goal is to follow Jesus together. It's why we exist. And so in this group, you guys are going to be challenged and challenging one another to follow Jesus. And so there's a few announcements that I wanted to let you know about before we dive into things. The first one is that our high school retreat is coming up in October. So if you are in high school and you want to come on the retreat, what you have to do is you have to sign up. And so registration at this point should be live on the website. Your parent or guardian should have gotten an email that they can register. But if that doesn't work, there will be a link on the website. If you go to the youth page, I'll have like a little link where it's like sign up for the high school retreat, and you can click it and sign up and bam, you're done. I think it's $65 a student. And again, if for some reason you're not able to cover that, just let me know and we as a ministry will cover that cost for you. It's for 2 days. Super simple. There's no youth that week, and so our high school retreat is coming very soon, and I hope that if you're in high school that you join us there. And then also I just wanted to remind you that if you are in grades 10 to 12, we are forming a discipleship team. This discipleship team is going to meet together bi-weekly, so every other Wednesday from 6:30 to 8. And what we're going to do is we are going to study the scriptures together. We're going to pray together. We're going to have community, and we're also going to plan our Sunday night worship services. So that big, large gathering that we had last week, we're doing more of those, and we want you guys as a discipleship team to be in charge of those things. So whether it is volunteering on the music team, whether it is greeting, whether it's doing slides and lights, whether it is hosting a game, whether it is leading in prayer, whether it's even speaking, we want you guys to be able to get your hands dirty and get involved in this ministry and lead it for yourself. And so if you want to sign up, you need to come and talk to me, and I will write your name down. If you don't come and talk to me, I'm not going to give you the info to be invited to our discipleship team meetings, because those are going to start after our next worship service, which is next week. And so at our next worship service, we're going to have like a way for you to sign up, and I would love for you guys to join in on that. And then lastly, before we dive into things, I just wanted to remind you that we want to keep this space a distraction-free zone. And so if you're tempted to go on your phone like you will be, or your phone is your Bible, I just want to encourage you, bring a physical Bible. It's good for you and your brain actually to have a physical Bible. And we're just not going to have phones during this time, and we're not going to be distracting. So if your small group leader notices that you're being distracting, or someone around you in your group notices that you're being distracting, or you yourself realize that you're being distracting, they're probably going to ask you like, hey, stop, just listen to them, respect the space. We're all here trying to follow Jesus together. If you're not interested in not being distracting, you want to be a distraction, this is genuinely just the wrong space for you. That this is a time that we only got like an hour and a half, and we want it to be intentional, and we want you to respect those around you. And we also want to respect yourself and your leaders by having this be a distraction-free zone. So we ask you to not be on your phone for the next hour and a half as we dive into this stuff, and we ask you to just try to stay on track, try to be respectful, and try to create an environment that can help people follow Jesus together. And so with that being said, why don't you go around in your group again, go through each other's name, introduce yourself and who you are, because not everybody's going to remember your name right away. So you want to make sure to introduce your name. Make sure that each person says like a hi from the week and a low from the week, something that was awesome and something that wasn't. And then lastly, our would you rather question. Would you rather be forced to sing along with every song that you hear, or be forced to dance with every song that you hear? So again, go around as a group, name, high of the week, low of the week, and would you rather be forced to sing to any song that you hear or dance to any song that you hear? Go. All right, so sadly, summer is coming to an end, and fall is here, and the temperature is colder. And up until this point, me and Emily, my wife, have been going to the beach a lot. And the thing is that I'm like from Alberta, and there's not a lot of beaches, and I kind of like the indoors. And so going to the beach is fun, but it's something that doesn't come naturally to me. On the other hand, my wife loves the beach, and if she could spend all day, every day at the beach, she would. And so during the summer, we often had like a clash where she would say she wanted to go to the beach, and I, of course, like was kind of like, I would rather just stay home and play video games. But we're married, so we have to compromise. And as a good husband, I decided, hey, I'll try to like submit to my wife and like serve her in this way and like go to the beach. And so what would often happen is Emily would come home from work or doing whatever, and she'd be like, I want to go to the beach. And my response in my head, which was loving, was I was like, I don't want to go to the beach, but I'll go anyways. And I would actually even say that out loud, where I'd be like, sure, let's go. And I would either be super sarcastic or negative, and it was very apparent in my body language and the way I behaved that I didn't really want to go to the beach. Now, inevitably, I thought that, hey, well, at least I'm going to the beach. Like, this is a loving action. You can force me to go to the beach, but you can't force me to go there and be happy. But actually, in behaving like that and acting like that, I kind of missed the point. Because the whole point of like being loving in a situation like that is like Emily would come home and be like, hey, I want to go to the beach. And I would just be joyful and say, oh, that's so awesome. I want to go to the beach too. And we would go. But if you come home and you say you want to go to the beach and someone's like, I don't want to go to the beach, but if we really have to, I guess I'll go, it kind of ruins it. And even though I maybe like in my actions was doing the right thing in going to the beach, without my heart being in it, it wrecked it, and it wasn't what it was supposed to be, and it was no longer an enjoyable, loving moment. And I kind of was a jerk about it, in all honesty, that it wasn't actually truly loving for me to just do the thing that I thought Emily wanted me to do, that I should have done it and done it gladfully. And so we are in this series called Wake Up Sleeper. And last week we kind of talked about how for a long time in our youth ministry, we were kind of doing this, that we were kind of going through the motions and we would do things, but our heart wasn't really in it, and how Jesus actually is challenging us as a youth group and as individuals to follow him and to passionately pursue him and to actually make our lives all about him. And this week we're going to dive into this a little bit more, and we're actually going to look at kind of that heart posture, that you can kind of outwardly do the right things and do what you seem like God would probably want you to do, but if your heart isn't in it and your actual heart posture behind it is wrong, you're actually not doing what God has called you to. That much like how when Emily would ask me to go to the beach, if I just did it like whining and complaining without the actual like right heart behind it, it didn't matter whether I went to the beach, because what I was doing wasn't actually out of love for her. I was just being forced to do it, and I was doing it in a way that was incredibly unloving. And we sometimes do this with God. And so my main idea today is this. It's that empty religion will leave us empty. And so we are going to read a little bit from a book called Amos. Amos is a book in the Bible. It's in the Old Testament. He was actually a prophet. And so, long story short, God's chosen people, Israel, go into exile. They're like under oppression by this like oppressive ruler in this oppressive nation called Babylon. And they're in slavery again, and they're depressed and sad. And this prophet named Amos actually like hears God's voice, he hears God's word, and God says, hey, I want you to go and tell Israel what I have to say to them. And so we're in the middle of this kind of book where Amos is speaking to Israel. And so he says this in chapter 5 to the Israelites. What sorrow awaits you who say, if only the day of the Lord were here. You have no idea what you're wishing for. That day will be darkness, not light. In that day, you will be like a man who runs from a lion, only to meet a bear. And then escaping the bear, he leans his hand against the wall in his house, and he's bitten by a snake. Yes, the day of the Lord will be dark and hopeless, without a ray of joy or hope. And so you might be like, what the heck is going on? And I'll kind of explain. So like I said, Israel, they used to be this free nation. They're this people that God said, hey, through you guys, I'm actually going to restore the world to what it should be. But because of sin and them turning away from God and not actually following him, they actually get taken captive by this nation called Babylon. And so they're in exile, they're slaves, they're oppressed, and they feel like God has abandoned them. And so they have this deep longing in them, and that God has actually promised them that he's not going to leave them in slavery forever, that he's going to save them and he's going to overthrow Babylon. And so they're kind of waiting for this thing called the day of the Lord. They're waiting for the day that God will show up and rescue them from their oppressor. And they think this day will be exciting and it will be encouraging, and they can't wait for it. And what God says here is like, hey guys, I know that you're like excited for this day when I show up and I appear, but I'm telling you that you shouldn't be, and that you think this day is actually going to be a great day for you, but it's actually going to be horrible. To which you're like, that sounds weird. Why would God appear and it would be bad? Like when I imagine Jesus showing up, I imagine that it would be like a positive thing. But God here says, no, it's not. Like, you don't understand what this day is going to be like for you, and that you are excited to see me, but you really genuinely shouldn't be. It's kind of like this. So like when I come home, I have a dog and his name is Alfie, and he gets super pumped. And when I come home, he gets so pumped that he actually has this annoying habit that he wants to like grab onto me with his mouth. And so we've actually trained him to like pick up a toy and he'll grab the toy instead of me because he just gets so pumped he can't control himself, and he'll wag his tail and he's just super, super happy. And so often when I come home, he's super excited and joyful. But there's other times when I come home or I appear that he shouldn't be joyful. And one of these times happened this week. So even if I like enter into a different room and I kind of close the door and then I come out of that room, he's just as pumped as if I had left the house, and he's excited for my presence to arrive. But earlier this week, I was having a shower, and while I was showering, I began to hear like very strange knocking noises and like things moving around, and things just didn't sound right. And so I stopped my shower and I walked out of the bathroom, opening the door, and I saw Alfie. And even in this moment, he realized this was not an exciting time. This was a bad time. And he immediately like pulled his ears back and like lowered his head, and he like tucked his tail, and he looked spooked. And my initial reaction was like, why is he spooked? And I looked around and I saw that he had taken my cat's food, which was on the counter. And so he like hopped up on the counter, grabbed the cat's food and brought it down, and he'd eaten the entire thing. And so when I appeared, it usually is like an exciting moment for him. But in this moment, it was nothing but darkness and misery, because he knew that he had done something wrong, and that my presence and my appearing was no longer a positive thing. But in this case, it was about to become a very negative thing for him because he had done something wrong. And in a similar way, this is what's happening here for Israel, is that God's coming and God's presence should actually be a positive thing, that it should be something where Jesus shows up and they are excited. But because they've actually done something wrong, they're kind of like my dog, where they don't understand that when God appears and he sees what they've been up to, he is not going to be impressed. And if they actually understood their situation, they would actually tuck their ears back, they would tuck their tail, and they would cower, because they knew that judgment was coming and that things actually weren't going to be good. And in a similar way, we Christians today are waiting for Jesus to come back. That Jesus, when he died and rose again, he ascended to heaven, and he said, hey guys, one day I'm going to come back and I'm going to judge the world, and I'm going to set the world free from sin and death and restore it back to what it used to be. And Christians a lot of times are pumped for this, and they can't wait for Jesus to come back because he's going to end sickness, he's going to end death, he's going to end misery. But in another way, Jesus' return can be a really negative thing. That actually, if you haven't been living your life for God, and even if you think you have been, but your heart's been wrong, that returning is scary. I know for me personally as a Christian, there are a lot of times in my life where I knew that I wasn't doing what God had called me to, and the last thing I wanted was for Jesus to return, because I knew that if he were to return in this moment, I was not in a place where he was going to return happy with me. I was in a place where he was going to return as if I had taken the cat's food down from the counter and was eating it, where he's going to be like, dude, what are you doing? This is not what I left you to do. This is horrible what you're doing. And in a similar way, that's what Israel's experiencing here. And that's what God is saying, like, hey guys, you think you're in a positive place right now, but you're not. That you think you should be excited for my appearing, but you really shouldn't be, because the direction that you're headed in is bad. And if I show up now, I'm coming to judge you. I'm not coming to save you. And so in your small groups, I want you to discuss this question together. Does the thought of Jesus possibly returning scare you? Why or why not? But Amos isn't done here. He's got a little bit more that he wants to say of what God has spoken to him. And so he says this next. So this is God speaking through the prophet Amos. And he says, I hate all of your show and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and your solemn assemblies. I will not accept your burnt offerings and your grain offerings. I won't even notice all of your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise. I will not listen to the music of your harps. And so God says, hey, you guys are pumped for my return. You actually shouldn't be pumped because I'm coming to judge you. And they go, well, what are you going to judge you for? And he's like, for this. It's for like empty religion. That you guys have all of these worship services and offerings and you like act like you sacrifice all these things to me, but your heart actually isn't in the right place. And that I actually hate your worship services. That when you guys sing my praises and when you feel like you're doing things for me, I actually hate it. Like I actually don't enjoy it. That what you're doing and the things that you think are like bringing me joy are not. They're bringing me the opposite, because I actually know your heart. I know what you're actually doing. And I know that all of these things you're doing are just empty. That you act like you worship me, you act like you follow me, but actually on the inside, as to who you people actually are, you're not. And so instead of enjoying your praise and your worship songs, I hate them and I wish you would just stop. And so this letter is like really intense. But what God is trying to get through to us is that it doesn't matter if you outwardly do the right things. It actually matters what your heart is. That just like how if my wife asked me to go to the beach and I do it, but inside I'm like whining and complaining and I don't want to be there at all, that kind of ruins the whole thing. And in a similar way, we can show up to youth, we can show up to church, we can like sing during worship songs, we can lift our hands, but it can actually mean nothing. And it actually can bring judgment on us in the sense that we can sing these songs and act like we worship God. But deep down in our actual hearts, we don't worship God. We don't care about God. We don't actually want to follow him, and we're not following him. What we're doing is essentially just a show, that we're just putting on a religious show to make it look like we're Christian when we're not. This is why non-Christians often hate the church. It's because it looks like it's full of hypocrites, that you have these people who get on stage and preach about God and preach about judgment, preach about sin, but secretly in their life, they're hiding all of this sin, and they're hypocrites. And the thing is that for many of us, if we're honest, that's us. That if people actually were able to see what we do in the dark, what we do when no one is looking, when it's no longer a show and it's just us and God, that people wouldn't be impressed, that we would look like hypocrites. And for us as a youth group, this was true, that we could have this youth group and we can do these things, but we knew that actually at the core of what we were doing and how we were behaving at youth, it wasn't bringing God glory. It was probably actually doing the opposite. And in my own life, this has been true, that I've actually been the hypocrite, that for a large chunk of my life, I would show up to church and I would act the way you're supposed to. I would sing the songs and I would behave in the way that I knew that people wanted me to. But inside, I didn't care. And I would go back to school and I would go back on my sports teams and I would just do whatever I wanted. And then I would show up to church again and I would act like, oh God, like I praise you, I worship you, but it wasn't real. And actually in that, I wasn't actually bringing God any joy, because he knew what I was like the rest of the week. And he knew what I was like when no one was even looking, which was worse than what I was doing when people were looking. And so I was a hypocrite. And I actually had to face this moment, and I've had to face it more than once in my life, where I went, man, I know that the way I'm living my life and the person I am when no one is looking is actually not bringing God glory. That God isn't impressed with me showing up to youth and showing up to church and acting like I worship him and seeming like I'm this like Christian who actually cares about God, when the doors are closed and no one's looking, the last thing I'm thinking about is what God thinks or what God wants of me. And that in that worship and that way I was living, it wasn't actually bringing God glory. It didn't make him happy that I showed up to church and did that, because there was no heart change. And without that heart change, it didn't really matter. That just like how me going to the beach and just whining about it doesn't really mean much to my wife, in a similar way, me showing up to church and acting like I care about God and doing all the right things and saying all the right things didn't matter, because it didn't change my heart. And I've had several moments throughout my life where I've had to repent, where I've had to like turn the opposite way of that, because what God says is that that kind of religion, that kind of empty religion that's just honestly hypocrisy, it doesn't make him happy or impressed. That what he's after is actually people who have a heart change, who actually want to follow him with all of their heart, not people who want to put on a show and just do the right thing and say the right thing because they're supposed to. And so in your small groups, I want you to discuss this. Why do you think some people say they follow Jesus with their words but not their actions? Do you sometimes struggle with this? Why or why not? But God can't just leave Israel in this like kind of depressed state, so he's got something that he wants to say to them next, and it's this. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice, an endless river of righteous living. So actually what was happening in Israel is they would have these festivals and these worship services, but they were oppressing the poor. And actually the way they were living their lives looked like they didn't know God at all. They just kind of did what everybody else around them did in Babylon. And God says, hey, like, you guys got to cut this out. That I'm not impressed with your empty worship services. I'm not impressed with your show. That you think that when I show up that it's going to be this exciting thing. But right now, if you stay the way you are, it's going to be an incredibly dark day. But there's actually a way to change it. And the way to change it is to stop putting on a show, to stop acting religious but not actually having your heart changed, and to actually let there be a flood of justice and let there be an endless river of righteousness. Meaning that God says, hey, I want your actions to actually follow your words. And if you say you follow me, then follow me. In the way you live your life, I want you to actually pursue justice and to help the oppressed and to care for the homeless and the orphan and the widow and those who are cast out by society. And in a similar way, I don't want you to just praise me with worship songs and with like your lips, but I actually want you to praise me with your life. That if you believe that I'm God, then change the way you're living, that to actually live righteously. Don't just do it while other people are looking and while you're in church. Do it while you're at school. Do it when you're in your clubs. Do it when you're at home. Do it when you're on your sports teams. Do it when you're in your bedroom and the door's closed and no one is looking. That I want your entire life to be a life of righteousness, not just when people are looking and you're supposed to be putting on the show. And there was actually a point in my life where I really felt convicted of this, because I was actually training to be a pastor. I was in Bible college, but a lot of the way I was following Jesus was just head knowledge and lip service. That there was a lot of stuff going on in my life that I was hiding and covering up that wasn't bringing honor to God. And I remember one specific time where I felt convicted about this is when I was with my older brother. For a period of time, we were living together. And during this time, we needed a green machine. If you don't know what a green machine is, it's essentially like this cleaning tool that helps you clean fabric. And I don't know why, but we needed one. And so we were on Facebook Marketplace and we found someone who had one. And so we went to meet them and buy it. And in that moment, we went to this parking lot to go and buy this green machine, and the whole situation was kind of weird. And we knew that something was up. Where this lady came out and she had like her kids in her car, and things just didn't seem right. Like, you know, when you're kind of in those moments, you're like, something is off here. And me being the person trained to become a pastor, I should have been more attuned to this, but I wasn't. And what we realized in the moment was that this lady was actually struggling. She wasn't selling this green machine just because she wanted to sell it. She sold it because she needed money. And as we began the transaction and like giving her the money, she kind of talked about how she didn't have enough money to get gas for her car, and this was going to give her money for gas and all of those different things. And something inside of me was wrong. Where in that moment I was hearing the story and I was like, yeah, okay. And I just felt like uncomfortable and weird, and I just kind of wanted to escape the situation with the green machine. And what my brother did is he did what I should have actually done. And in that moment, he was like, well, if you need gas, like, let's go get you gas. And so that's exactly what we did, was we got her gas and she was able to have it. And then on top of that, my brother's like, hey, like, I don't need this green machine. Like, if you want to keep it, you can keep it and just take the money and go. To which she refused, and she gave us the green machine, and the thing worked too, so that was great. But in that moment, he genuinely cared about her, and his religion wasn't just words and head knowledge and lip service. It was actually in his actions, that he actually genuinely cared about helping this lady and showing her Jesus and showing her what it looks like to be compassionate and godly. While I, on the other hand, who was someone who was trained to be a pastor, just wanted to escape the situation and run away. And my heart was not in the right place, where I wasn't caring about this lady like Jesus would, where I was just being selfish and self-centered. And in a similar way, that can happen to us, and that has happened to us, where we often have shown up to these worship services, we've shown up to youth, and we show up to church, and we do the right thing, we do what we know we're supposed to do when we're in this space, but when we go out into the world, we don't live it. That when you're at school, you talk like everybody else, you bully people just like everybody else, you put people down and you don't stand up for those who are oppressed, that you just kind of go with the flow and do whatever the crowd is doing. And the same thing at home, the way you treat your siblings, the way you treat your parents, it doesn't show them who Jesus is. In fact, it's the exact opposite, that the way you're living your life isn't lining up with the words that you're saying on Sunday. And what God is saying is like, hey, that this is not what you're called to, that you're called to actually live righteously, that you're called to actually do justice. That this whole idea of like empty religion and being a hypocrite, God is not interested. And in fact, God is incredibly unimpressed. And you might think that showing up on a Sunday and lifting your hands and singing some songs makes God happy, but it doesn't. That if you don't let that worship pour out into every area of your life and the way you live, it's useless and it's worthless, that it doesn't actually do anything and it doesn't impress anyone. And what God is challenging us here to is to actually live a life where we follow him, that we don't just say that we follow Jesus, that we actually do, in the way that we treat others, in the way that we love, in the way that we actually personally like follow him and do the things we know he's called us to, that we don't actually just fall into sin and do what the world is doing, that we actually take a stand and we actually like submit to him and follow him and trust that his way is better, that even when nobody is looking, that we choose to serve him and follow him. Instead of just doing this kind of show thing where your heart isn't actually in it, but you're outwardly just doing the right thing to appear good. God actually wants to change your heart, and he wants you to have more than a show, that he actually wants the things you say to actually change the person that you are. And he actually wants you to experience real religion and a real relationship with him, which isn't just lip service and doing what looks like the right thing, but actually allowing your heart to be changed, and the way you treat people to be changed, and the way you see the world to be different. And so lastly, I want you guys to discuss this. How do you think the world's view of church would change if the church actually practiced what they preached? What do you think God is maybe calling you to change in your life this week? Empty religion will leave us empty. For many Christians around the world, they think the reappearing of Jesus will be an exciting day. But what God says here is that for many, it will not be an exciting day, and that they shouldn't be excited because the way that they're living is hypocritical, that they actually don't love him and serve them. They just say that they do, and they just sing worship songs, and they just pray, and they just go to church, but it doesn't change their life. And it's actually hypocrisy, that they offer all these things, but they're not willing to actually offer themselves, that they actually offer their words, but they're not willing to offer their heart. And God is calling us to more. He's calling us to repent from that, to turn from that, and to actually give him every fiber of our being and not just say that we do. And he wants to see us become a vessel to actually do justice in the world, and to actually make things right, and to actually genuinely care about people, and to also allow our lives to be changed, to not just say that we follow him, but actually in the things we do to follow him. And he doesn't want it to be just like me and Emily at the beach, where she says, hey, I want to go to the beach, and I go, fine, I guess I'll go, and I whine the whole time. What actually needs to happen is we need to actually go to the beach and do it joyfully, that our heart should actually change, because to go to the beach and to do what we know we're supposed to do, but do it with a heart that isn't in it, isn't actually a love for God. That we actually need to change and repent and actually learn to love those things, because it's in that heart change that we actually truly love God. Empty religion will leave us empty. So with that being said, why don't you guys take some time to pray for one another? If anybody has any prayer requests or things they would like prayer for, invite them to offer that and just pray for one another. And then when it hits 8 o'clock, you guys should head home and leave whoever house you're in. And so we're meeting together again for another worship service next week. And so we will see you guys back at the church next week for another worship service. I can't wait to do it. But until then, I hope you have a good night, and we will see you guys next time.